Hi everyone and welcome back to Heimler's History Economics Edition. So if you've been tossing and turning at night, or biting your nails down to the quick, or digging at your scalp so much that your lymph nodes are swollen up to the size of Chianti grapes, all because you don't understand the short-run relationship between inflation and unemployment, then I got a video for you. I'm finna teach you about the Phillips Curve, so let's get to it. So, the Phillips Curve. What is it and where did it come from? It's actually a fascinating story. In 1958, a New Zealand-born economist named Alban W.H. Phillips published a paper in which he analyzed reams of historical economic data from Britain. Well, I thought it was a good story. It's not. Anyway, doesn't matter where it came from, the Phillips Curve just explains the short-run relationship between inflation and unemployment. And what old Alban Phillips found is that the relationship between these two phenomena is inversely proportional, which is to say, as inflation rises, unemployment decreases, but as inflation decreases, inflation rises. And if that explanation doesn't find a home in your brain folds, then let me show it to you. It's graph time. Okay, so here you see the short-run Phillips Curve. You've got inflation here on the y-axis and unemployment here on the x-axis. And you can see here visually what I said before. If inflation is high, that means unemployment is low. If inflation is low, that means unemployment is high. And it's that simple. Wait. I'm getting word that it is emphatically not that simple. You see, this inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment worked beautifully until the 1970s. The economic realities of the 1970s actually defied the Phillips Curve, and here's why. In the 1970s, there was a drastic increase in production costs, which, if you remember on our aggregate supply and aggregate demand model, means that aggregate supply fell, shifting the SRAS curve to the left here. And when that happened, three things happened along with it. As you can see, output decreased, and because of that, unemployment increased. And let me stop here for a moment and remind you that according to the Phillips Curve, if unemployment increases, that means that inflation should be decreasing. But as you can see on this graph, not so. In fact, the price level rose, which means inflation rose. And just so you remember, this was a scenario that economists call stagflation. And what economists discovered, if I could just do a little Phillips graph over here, is that the economy in stagflation had only shifted the curve to the right. And that actually gives us a worse trade-off before, which means higher inflation and higher unemployment. And what they further discovered is that the shifting of the Phillips curve was directly related to people's expectation of future inflation. If people expected inflation to increase in the next year, that would reliably shift the curve to the right. If, on the other hand, people expected inflation to decrease in the next year, that would reliably shift the curve to the left. And yet another way of saying that is that changes in the short-run Phillips curve are directly proportional to shocks in the short-run aggregate supply curve. Now here's something we haven't talked about yet, but we'll get to that in a second. When the short-run aggregate supply curve shifts because of a negative supply shock like this, the short-run Phillips curve will shift to the right. On the other hand, when the short-run aggregate supply curve shifts to the right because of a positive supply shock, the short-run Phillips curve shifts to the left here. But you didn't think that the Phillips curve had no relationship to changes in aggregate demand, did you? Truly, I had hoped so. Well, you were wrong. Now, when aggregate demand shifts, that doesn't mean that the Phillips curve will shift. Rather, it just means that we're moving along the Phillips curve. So, when aggregate demand shifts this way, that increases the price level and leads to lower unemployment. So, you could go from here to here on the Phillips curve. But when aggregate demand decreases like this, that means the price level is dropped, unemployment is rising, and you go from here to here. Okay, so that's the relationship between our ADAS model and the short-run Phillips curve. But there's yet one more item to add to our Phillips curve graph. We've seen what the relationship looks like between inflation and unemployment in the short run. Now let's see what it looks like in the long run. And just to remind you, we saw that in the short run, the relationship between inflation and unemployment was inversely proportional. As one rose, the other one fell. But what economists have further discovered is that in the long run, there is no relationship between inflation and unemployment. So that means, as you can see here, that our long-run Phillips curve will be vertical. And where this curve intersects the x-axis here is the natural rate of unemployment. And just in case you've forgotten, the natural rate of unemployment is frictional unemployment plus structural unemployment. So what this vertical curve is telling us is that in the long run, our economy will always return to full employment regardless of any change in inflation. Now, the long run curve can shift, and it's easy to understand why. If this is the natural rate of unemployment, then anything that increases the natural rate of unemployment will shift the LRPC to the right. And anything that decreases the natural rate of unemployment will shift the curve to the left. So for example, if a government decides to extend unemployment benefits from 2 months to 10 months, that means the natural real rate of unemployment will increase, and that will shift our long-run Phillips curve to the right. Alright, and that is all you need to know about the Phillips curve. I will see you next time. Alright, thanks for watching another economics video. If this video has snuck inside of your brain folds and deposited anything good, then hit the like button and let me know about it. And if you're interested in getting a 5 on your AP Economics exam in May, then subscribe to the channel and I will do my best to help you get there. Bye.